Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a crucial aspect of software development, and that is integration testing in .NET 8 Web API. Whether you are building a small API or building large-scale microservices architecture, ensuring that all the components of your application work seamlessly together is essential. That is where integration testing comes into play. The question is, why do we need integration testing? Let's imagine you are working on a web application that involves multiple services. This service could be user authentication service, a payment gateway, and a product catalog. Individually, each service might work perfectly when tested in isolation. But what happens when you integrate them together? The payment gateway might need to communicate with the user service to verify user credentials, or the product catalog might need to pull in discount information from another service. If any of these interactions fail, it could lead to a broken application or worse, a poor user experience. That is why integration testing is so important. It helps ensure that the different models of your application work together as expected, catching bugs that might only appear when services interact. Mostly, integration testing is being captured in the controller level. Why? In a .NET 8 Web API, the controller acts as a central hub that orchestrates calls to various repositories and external HTTP services. Think of it as the conductor of an orchestra, ensuring that every instrument plays its part correctly. By focusing your integration test on the controller, you can simulate real-world scenarios where the controller coordinates these different components. Since the controller is responsible for handling requests, interactions with database through repositories, and making HTTP calls to other services, it makes it the perfect candidate for integration testing. Testing at this level gives you confidence that the entire flow of your application, from receiving a request to returning a response, is functioning correctly. So in this project, we're going to look at how we can integrate that in our API. This is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be adding our blank solution. We add our two projects. One is going to be an API, as you know, and the other one is going to be a unit testing framework, whereby we're going to install packages and try to create a test for this control that you're going to create. So let's get started. Make sure you have a Visual Studio 2022 or higher installed. Let's first create a blank solution. So click on Create New Project. Let's choose blank solution. Let's give it a name. So I'm going to say this is demo, maybe integration testing in .NET Web API. So let me add solution to this. Choose location to store this project. And after you are done, click on Create to create this project. So now that we have our project created, the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going there and I'll add solution folders. Let's add two solution folders. One going to be source, which is going to contain the product. That's an API. And also let's add another one which is going to handle the test. So in the source, let's add this project, and it's going to be Web API. So click on that, give it a name. Here it is going to be product API. Let's add this, create project. After we are done with this, we go ahead and now add the framework, that's the xUnit. So I click on the same folder, and that is a test folder. Add new project. And now this project, we're going to choose xUnit. And now here is product API.test. So that is the name of this project. Alright, so let's go ahead and install some packages to API. Since we're going to be working with database, we're going to create a CRUD operation. We can do that. But before we do it, let's click on project and now add a model. Now, since this is product API, definitely it's going to have a model known as product, right? So you can change this to an API that you want to create. So here, let's specify some default properties. So ID is a 1 for an ID for primary key. Aside from that, we're going to have something like name. Then we can have another one as quantity. Let's maintain this. Let's scaffold use that feature to create our CRUD operation for us easily. So add the new scaffolded item. In there, choose an API. You want to go in for a controller which takes in all the CRUD. Click on add. And here, this is what you're going to do. You need to select the model product. DB context, we have none. So we can use our product DB context. So product DB context. Click on add. Then we need to choose our provider, that's an SQL, and there's our controller name as product, and we have the name as controller. Click on add to get this feature utilized. So this is going to install some necessary packages, the EF-Core.2, the SQL Server, and some necessary packages to get this done. So let's wait while it is doing the magic. Alright, so our API is ready, and as you can see, we have a default setups being created for us. When you check our solution, you can see that here we have our controller created, and that is a product controller. It is in here. And then we have all the CRUD operation in here. When you check our program.ts file, you can see we have our connection string specified, which takes in our product DB context. And also when you check our app settings, we have our connection string being called in here. Here I'm going to make it as local, and I remove this, so you can also specify your local server. There's the database name, so I'm going to remove all this, and I'll make it as demo integration testing, so demo IT. And let's change this to trust server certificate. So trust server certificate, let's set this to true as well. Great. And also, when we are done with this, all that we need to do here is let's build this project and apply database migration. Alright, so pull up your package manager console and add migration. Give it any name you want. I'm going to say first. Let's wait and see while the file gets created, and after that we're going to update this to create a table database and respective tables for us. And that's great, it is done. So update database. Let's do this magic. Yep, and that is also done. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here is let's run this and check it out. So we're going to choose an HTTPS. That is where this API should run on, and we have a default HTTPS port specified in the line settings, so we need not to do anything, just run this project. And that is ready. So let's try to get all. Let's make sure we are connected successfully to our database. This should return an empty array, and let's go and also add one. It has been added successfully. Let's retrieve all. We must now have one record. Okay, so this is working, but I want to check our controller. It seems like there are a lot of things in here. Our controller should be simple, and it should not contain a data access. So how the application works in terms of connecting to the database, retrieving and doing your stuff shouldn't be inside the controller. It should be simple. So it means you need to create a repo to handle that. This repo is going to have an interface and implementation, that's a repository, whereby this is going to get connected to the database and perform all the other operations that we it has been specified in the controller. Then when we are done, we just have to make a reference of that, inject it in here, and now start using it to make this controller look simple. Okay, no overload. So let's do that. So right click on the API project, let's add a folder, and now with this I'm going to name this as interface. But before we can do it, we have to stop the process and say this is interface. Now with this interface, let's create an item, and this should be an interface. I'm going to name this I product, that is the interface of product. And in the I product, I'm going to have the CRUD operations in there. Now this CRUD operation is going to return integer for each. So you can see we have add, we have get all, delete, and update. That is a CRUD operation. Once you are done with this, we need to create an implementation. That's a repo for that. So let's also add another folder, and that is repository. Now this repository, let's add product repo. It's a class which is going to inherit this interface. So product repo, this product repo needs to inherit I product interface. Now let's include the namespace or the reference. After that, we need to implement the interface that we have in there. Okay, let's inject our product DB context in there. Product DB context, we say this is context in here. Okay, so when we go to the add, what are we going to do? We can just go to the controller and pick these methods and paste them in here, or we can override it and now create our own. So maybe we want to do that. Okay, this is quite simple. As soon as we initiate or we call the save changes, it returns an integer. So you want to return that integer in here, and that will determine whether the operation was successful or not. Let's also check for delete. It's also going to do same in case we make a find and it couldn't find it. Then what I'm going to do, we want to return -1, which tells you that right, what you provided isn't found. But in case it is found, then please go ahead and remove it from it. Then let's see how to get this list. This is going to return either an empty or a list. So we need to make just one statement to handle that. Get async, we can use find async to get that. Since we are providing an ID, find async work perfectly with an ID. So we can specify that beautifully in that. Then for update, what are we doing? We are not making any tracking. We are just going to update it automatically as you see. But with this, you provide wrong info with wrong ID, is going to be added. For now, we are not interested in performance. We actually want to get something done, then we can focus on the integration testing. Great. Now that we have this, what is the next thing to do? Let's go to our program, go in there and register this. How do you register? Pass in beta.services.add, then make it as a scope, pass in the I interface, then the product interface. So that is a repo. You pass in that, and we are good. Let's make sure we include the namespace or the reference. Great. That is it. Now let's go ahead and make sure we have it. But before we do that, I have an image running in Docker, and it is a Netcode-Hub and local API. And if I try to access it, I'm supposed to have this. It's running on the port of HTTP of 7000, and now with this I can get access to the same product. Here I have one product added, and that is a string updated, quantity is 450, and the ID is 2. Now this is running on a different service, so if I want to make a call from my API to another API, I need to handle it with service. And now this service too, we want to orchestrate it through the controller, so we can integrate it our unit testing, our integration testing as well. So let's create a service to handle that. Then we're going to try this out and check it out. So in here, let's right click on this, go to add, and add a new folder, and I'm going to name this as service. Let me create one service here. Since I'm going to have a single service, I don't want to have a constructor, not the constructor, the interface implementation. I want to put everything in one. So this is going to be product service. Now this product service, we want to, since we're going to be using an HTTP client, inject it and say this is client. And in here, let's have our public async task. And this is get product. But you know, this task here, it is returning a list. So let's go in there and specify the list in there. This is list of products. That is all the endpoint is going to return. Then let's have a look with the try catch. So as soon as there's any issue, we can return now. Handle error is very important. So don't forget to handle error in that. And here you want to return empty array in case there's any issue connecting to the database or that service. And with that, let's have, it's a product list and it's equal to the client that we have in here dot, we have get from JSON async. We can specify the list of products that you want to get. Then in there we want to specify the link is HTTP, is running on 7000 / API, running on 7000. So HTTP has this localhost running on 7000, has an API / product. Okay, so that is the link to that external service. And now this is going to return a list of products, and I'll make it in here. After we are done with this, let's return the product. Okay, now let's register this service. So we can grab this, we go to our program, and in here we need to register an HTTP client and also the service. So let's put it once. We can say that product.services.add HTTP client, and I'm making it limited to this. So register the interface or this service as well as the HTTP client. Now let's run this and check it out. Alright, so let's make a call to this from this get product, and let's check if the interface that we extracted is working. But well, it should work because we haven't modified the controller, isn't it? Yeah, so this is going to work still. Let's see. Yes, it's working, but our interface is not affected. It's not using the interface. The reason is when you go to our controller, you see we are still using the DB context, and that shouldn't be so. So let's go in there and now modify our product controller. So let's inject our product. So product, and I will give it as product interface. Aside from that, we have product service, and we say this is product service. You see? Now let's grab this. So here from the get product, we can remove this since we are using primary constructor. Instead of getting the list from the DB context, we can call it from the interface. We want to return two action state, okay and not found. In case it is found, do this. In case it isn't, do that. We're also going to do the same with the get by ID. We're also returning two action state in here. And on these actions, we haven't not found an okay. In case it isn't, not found. In case it is, then get to the okay with the product. Now, if I want to update it, this is returning an integer. So how am I going to handle that? Since return an integer, in case the ID and the return integer is greater than 0, it means the update was successful, and in that I can return okay. But in case it isn't, I can return bad request to handle that. Okay, so that is an update in here, and I can go ahead and remove this ID. And now I don't want to specify any parameter, so let me also remove this. We're going to return a result. In case it's greater than 0, return okay with that result. That is 1. In case it isn't, then do that. when you go to the post, we also want to do same as we did. So let's have a look at that. We're also going to return the same ID. And now when you go to delete, we're also doing same. Now with the delete, we're also going to return two state. It could be okay, or it could be no content, or it could be not found. In case it's not found, then do this. But in case it isn't, then delete it and return okay. Or here you can even return no content. It depends on how you want it to be done. Okay, let's stick to this. So we have our controller modified from the default setup, and in here let's save it, let's give it a run, and now let's check it out. And that is ready. So try to get this, and now this is having a process performed in a separate class or interface, and it's being called in the controller. And also we have a service which is calling another extra service somewhere, and now this service is being orchestrated through the controller. Okay, so we have it in here. Now let's go and check the service. So there is a product service. We did not add the product service, right? So let's go and add the product service. When we check from this, okay, so this is delete. No, this is not. We need to have a column. This gets from the product, and now here it is product interface. Then here it is delete. Passing this ID that we have in here, and that is all. So this is going to make a call to an external service in here, and now let's check it up and see whether that call is actually made. Alright, so this is working. Now from our service, let's check if it's able to call the external service that we have, and it's returning list here. So with this, I can turn off this external service of mine. Let's see, from a terminal it is running in here. Let me stop this. Stopping, so it is stopped. Now let's make a call again and check if it can return. So this is product, talking about this service. So this service, try this again, and this will return an empty list. Yes, but if I put a service on, then this is going to return it again. Click on execute, and it's going to return the same record as it returned earlier on. Yes, so it tells you that our API, our repository, and our HTTP service, they are all working, which are being called in the controller and integrated nicely. Great. Now let's focus on the integration. Now integration is we're going to perform it on the controller, saying the controller orchestrates all the other services, including the repos and also the HTTP client service. Now to do that, we added a framework already, so we can go ahead and now right click on dependencies. Let's add project references, and now let's add the API project. Aside from that, let's install some packages. That's what we're going to be using, like Fluent Accession, and also MVC.testing. These are the packages that we're going to be using in building our integration testing. Okay, so let's have MVC testing. So the name is, I think, yeah, that's the ASP.NET-Core.MVC.testing. That is the package that we need to install. So that is this one. Click on install. Aside from there, we need to install Fluent Accession. Okay, so we have these two packages installed nicely. let's go ahead and create our web application factory. Now this is going to have a default setup for our testing to be conducted. So let's do that, and in our test we're going to create a class. Now this class, I'm going to name this as product web application factory, since I'm creating that for product. Now this product web application factory, this should be generic. We're going to take in the T startup. So T startup. Now with this T startup, this class is going to inherit from web application factory coming from the package that we installed. And now this also needs to take in the T startup. Let's define where this T startup here, it is a class. Okay, so T startup. So this is class. All right, so this is a class, and in that we need to, this should be public. It's a public class. So from this, we need to override a default method that is configure web host. Now this web host takes in this iWebHost builder. Now within that builder, we can go ahead and specify, check if we have a DB context. We want to remove that and then create our own specifically or purposely for this test. So let's do that. We're going to say this builder dot configure service. And now this configure service, we want to, let's open this. And now here, let's make sure we have our service in here. So let's grab our service. We grab our service. In case the service is not null, it has a DB service created or injected, then please let's go ahead and remove that. Now here it is not an API context, it's rather product DB context. This is what we are talking about. In case it is found, go and remove it and now add our own one. So which are we going to add? We want to explicitly add our own default connection in here. As you can see, product DB context. Then we have our services.addDB context. We specify our product DB context. Then we need to use an SQL server and our specify connection string, as you know already, right? So we're going to be having a simple method to handle this connection string. Okay, now once you're done, let's build the service provider and then get a required service out of this product DB context, so we can update or we can perform migration to a database. So we get it from here. We build the service provider. We create a scope, and in that we can get the required service out of this product DB context class, which have been created. All right. So now that we do this, let's go ahead and now try this. Let's perform database migration, because we have a migration created already. So we need to update that, and in that we need to have a method known as cData, which is going to perform some additions to the database. In case you have an exception, what do you think we're going to be doing? Let's use an iLogger to log this exception. Okay, and in here we need to specify our product web application, and now we need to specify our, so as we have this set, we need two methods. So let's first handle the first one, get connection string. How do we specify connection? We need to build, in our test, we are not having access to the configuration file. So we need to have a configuration builder built and also add the configuration file of this abstract.json, so we can go in there and get a connection string in there. So in order to do that, we can use this simple code to handle this. Then we get a connection string, so we add this abstract.json. Then in that there's a connection then as default test. Is that so? Let's go to our abstract. The name is product DB test. Let's grab that and now replace it in here. So now we have our connection string. You're going to return a string which will be used in there. All right, now for database seeding, we want to check if there's no data after migration, then please go ahead and add 3 records to that. So you can see from here we specify our DB context, and I think that we check it that if there's no any, then kindly add this. Okay, we have a name and we have the quantity. After that, you make sure you do save and I return it peacefully. That is all we need to do to create or to set up our web application factory, which is responsible of creating new instance of our context, creating database, and also make sure that you have migration performed and certain database to be ready for CRUD. Now that we are through with this, let me just clear unnecessary usings. So let's go ahead and create our controller. So from the test or from the project, let's add a new folder to this. And here I have to name it as products, let's say controllers. Okay, so that's the name of the folder. It tells you that all controller tests are going to be in here. And now which controller are we talking about? It's a product controller test. So I'm going to say this is product controller test. Now within this product controller test, what we need to do here is quite simple. We just need to inherit from this I class fixture. Now this class fixture should take in our product controller, not the test, rather our web factory, which takes in the tester tab of what? Program. Now program file here, it is defaultly set as internal. It is not public, and we cannot access it outside the scope of the application or the API. Talking about the product API, we want to access this product file inside the integration test, that's the xUnit framework. It's also that you cannot do that, but what we can do here is to modify that settings, and I'll make sure we expose it as public so we can use it in here. This is not advisable in production environment. This is for testing. I know before you produce it for production, you need to test it. So for testing environment, this is absolutely correct. You can use that to test your application and making sure that all is set and everything is working smoothly as expected. So let's maintain this. After this, we're going to modify that. Let's make it as public. Then the next thing that we need to do here is we're going to create constructor for this. So let's grab this. Let's paste it in the constructor. Now we can call this as factory. Then in here we need to have our client instance created. So we're going to say this is private and it is read only. We're going to say HTTP client, and let's give it a name as client because that is what we're going to be using to make a call. Then let's initialize it in here. So we say client is equal to this factory that we have dot create client. Now let's have a look with the first test. That is the first test is corresponding to the product controller first method, and that is a get product. Now get product return 2 actions, that is an OK and are not found. So we want to test both. So the first one here, it is a OK. Now with this OK, so I can say this is get product. And now this returning OK. So you can see making the call to the endpoint. Then we want to make sure that it is success. If not, they're going to throw an error. Then after that, we want to get as a list, and I'll make sure that it is not empty. So that's what we're doing. Aside from this, we can also make sure that we have the next one as not null. When in case none is found, and this is going to return not found. Okay, this is going to return not found. And in that, you make a call to this, and the status code should be not found, which is 404, which should be equal to the response that is coming from our service or our that's the service, the call that we are making here. So before this can work, it means that we have to create our own different database. We don't want to use the original database to test this. In case you have your default record set already, we don't want to be adding or be deleting that. So let's go to our solution, your project API. You go to your app settings in here. We can make a duplicate of this, or even we can change this to, let's say, demo IT1. And now here, as soon as we run this, when you go to web factory, you will see we are sitting with 3 records. So you must have these 3 records. If you want to verify that, let's put a breakpoint to our controller test down here, put it in here, then click on test, then debug or test. Click on that, and now let's have a look. Alright, so we have an issue here. Let's check up and see. Yeah, so this is not accessible. I've remembered. Yeah. Okay, so what we can do here is we go to our program file from this, and now let's make it as a public. Let's expose this class. The name here, it is program, and now within that you also want to have a public, and this is static void. We give it as main, which takes in a string array of what args, and in that we want to expose this. This should be static. So after the integration test, we have to revert it back to the default state. Now let's close it down here. Control KD, you format it well. Great. So now this is public. When you go to our controller, I think it's going to be solved now. Great. Let's go ahead. Now let's have our test. The breakpoint is hit. Now let's click on this, making a call to that. And in here, the response is coming here is what? Let's see, it has OK, and now we have it. So we can also put a breakpoint to this. Now this is going to get passed because it's going to return a list of product. If you want to verify it ourselves, go to product controller, put a breakpoint also here as well. Come back to the test, and now let's have to debug this again. So this is hit again. Now click on next, and you're going to call to the controller. Great. Now we are in. Now this will return 3 record because for seeding we did that, and that is a product 1. We have product 2, and we have product 3. Yes. So when I click on next, it's going to return OK with that, and now this test is passed. So this tells you that when the user makes a recall to this specific action, it's going to coordinate to all the servers, the repositories through a controller, and I'll get the desired result with no issue. What if in case there's no data in it, there's no record in database? Let's go to our factory, and now here, once you have the seeding, let's comment this seeding. We don't want to see this. Okay, so let's comment this. After migration, there's no seeding. Let's go back to the controller test, and now let's run this. This is going to return empty since this won't be found. Let's run this and check it out. Yeah, I told you. Yeah, so you can see it is passed, and here it returns no record in database since we put the seeding to off. Now let's go back and now put it on again. So it's going to see it as soon as the migration is done. Okay, now let's go to the next one, that is get by ID. And now this test here is going to get a product. Since we have a seeding of 1, 2, 3 records, we specify an ID of 1. So when you run this, you're going to get it in there from this endpoint. Then we make sure it is success, and we want to read it in the form of a product. Let's run this and check this out. Great, this is also working. It is done. Now let's see. The next thing to do here is we want to also check in case we provide wrong ID, which is not found in the database. Now you know in our seeding we are having 1, 2, 3. That is an ID 1, ID 2, ID 3. Let's provide ID 999 and check it out from here. It's going to pass, and here the status code is going to be not found. We can put a breakpoint and now verify. So click on this, debug, and I'll go to the product controller, and from the get by ID also put a breakpoint in here, and now let's check it out. That's great. So this is hits. Click on next. Now next, record this, and you can see from here response here it is what 404 not found. So click on continue, and now we have this also passed. Okay, now let's see what of when you create product. When you create product, what do you want to do? You know, it's returning either return an integer. This integer, in case it is greater than 1, meaning that the operation was successful, but in case it isn't, then there's something wrong. So here we want to return if it is greater. That is when the ID here, the return integer, is greater than 1. Okay, greater or equal to 1, and that's what we are setting it down here. The response that's equal to 1. We are reading a string. Now when you read a string, in order for it to compare an integer to a string, you must convert a string to integer, or vice versa. So we are comparing it over here by converting this string to an integer and now compare it in here. Let's run and see if this product can be created and can be added, and it should return passed. Yes, of course, and that is it. It is also passed. Now the next thing to do here is we're going to update this. In case I want to update, it's also going to return the same thing. We must provide a model. Now this model should have an ID that you want to update it, and also the name of the product. The ID one does exist, so we can update that. And in here I am using put async. So before I can use this put async, I must convert this object into JSON object in here. That's the reason why I am serializing it on top here. But while you can use put a JSON async, which would serialize the JSON straightforward and making that web call. Okay, so in here we are doing the same thing. We make sure that it is access status code. The response that is coming, you want to read it as a string, then convert that string to integer, and I'll make sure it is greater or equal to 1. Run this test, and I'll see the magic of this. Well, absolutely, that is great. It also passed. Now we have delete. Now you can see we have ID records of 1, 2, 3. So we can delete ID 1, we can delete ID 2, and we can delete ID 3. So we specify product ID of 1, making a delete, and in here it's going to return an ID of this deleted product. So we want to make sure it is greater or equal to 1. Let's run that, and this should work. Yeah, that is also passed. Now the last one here is, you see we are making a call to an external service, and in that you want to get a list of product. So this test will also make a call to this endpoint, whereby this endpoint will make an external call to another service. And now since this response is going to be in the form of a list, we can convert this to an enumerable or list. Any of them you can use in here. And now we want to make sure that it's returning not an empty array. If it is success, if in case it isn't, then it's going to return null in this endpoint. Then here it's going to be false. But while since our external service is running, we can test that one out. Let's test this out and see whether our service is running or not. Yep, and that is passed. So you can see that as soon as the call was made, if I check my console, you can see it's executed a command in here, like select star from whatever, product.id, product.name, and the quantity, right? So it made it just now. It means that our service is running, and it was able to respond to the request that was sent from this API. Well, so you can see that's a beautiful way of implementing integration testing in your application, specifically in the control level, which orchestrate all the other services and repos in that. And that wraps up our introduction to integration testing in .NET 8 Web API. Remember this, integration testing is vital for ensuring that all components or all parts of your application work together seamlessly. And focusing on the controller allows you to test the most critical pathways in your application, because the controller, it is a root to all services. Stay tuned for more in-depth tutorials on how to implement these tests in a real project. Thank you for watching this, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done that. I'm going to catch up again for another informative content like this. Till then, take care.